We're always telling your stories, and it's time someone tells ours. We're humans first, journalists second. We chose this career to give you a voice. Now we're voicing ours. It's true, journalism has much room for improvement, but not all hope is lost, and we want your trust back by humanizing one journalist at a time. We're sharing with you what we go through to bring you the news. The pain, the tears, the trauma, and the mental health struggles. It's painful, and sometimes we even work two jobs to make ends meet. But we all have something in common. The passion, the joy, and the love we feel for storytelling and holding the powerful accountable. That includes holding ourselves accountable. So here are stories from us. This is how we want to help improve the news industry. The Awakened Journalist is proud to present Media Healers by Emiliana Molina Fajardo. Hi everyone, welcome back to The Awakened Journalist and our special project Media Healers. Today we'll be speaking to Danny Freeman. He's an Emmy Award winning reporter who began his career as a political journalist for Colombia Reports around 2013 after graduating from Dartmouth College, and he actually graduated with a Cum Laude distinction and with a bachelor's degree in government. Danny has since worked in multiple roles with NBCUniversal, from a political reporter to hosting his own political show in San Diego, and he is currently a reporter at NBC in Philadelphia, which is market size 4. So Danny, congratulations on that move, and thank you for agreeing to do this interview.
Thank you, man. My absolute pleasure.
Awesome. So Danny, how did you first decide to become a journalist?
Yeah, Emiliana, it's interesting. My journey to journalism is a little different than a lot of other people. A lot of other people have these great stories of how they were 4 years old doing an anchor reel in their parents' basement. I was not like that at all. I was in college. I loved my school. I loved my studies. I did not know what I wanted to do. I loved politics. I loved political science. As you said, I majored in government. So I knew that I had an interest in policy. I was a nerd who took a lot of policy classes about how governments worked and why they worked. And finally, actually, the reason that I ended up in journalism is I graduated. I'm Colombian. I was adopted. And the one thing I knew I wanted to do when I graduated was go and live in Colombia. So I graduated. I found basically whatever job I could just to get me to Colombia, to get me down to the country that my family is from. And the job that I happened to get was this job working, as you mentioned, at Colombia Reports, a English language news website based in Medellin. And I said, you know what? I'll try this journalism thing for a couple of months. We'll see what happens. If it works out, great. If it doesn't, then I'll find another job. I'll go back to the States, whatever it may be. And as you can imagine, I was hooked. I loved the job. I loved the purpose. I loved the people in Colombia when I was down there. And that was 8 years ago now. And here we are today.
That's amazing, and I love that story because we met in San Diego when we were both working in California, and you told me that you were adopted and that you were from Medellin, and I'm originally from Medellin. So I loved hearing the fact that you just traveled down there to get a job, to get to know the country, the culture, learn more about your roots and where you were coming from. And how was that experience for you when you were there?
It was incredible. I always tell people it was like, a lot of people went to, like I said, to journalism school and had those experiences with great professors and great teachers. This was like my journalism school. This was my crash course because, as you very well know, the stories and the need for journalism in Colombia is above and beyond almost anything that we could comprehend here, frankly, I think, in the States. I remember one of my first interviews was with a political candidate for president at the time, who had to flee the country because there had been too many assassination attempts on her life in Colombia. And I'm a 22-year-old, 23-year-old kid. I mean, my eyes are open. And I just think that, as I kind of alluded to before, one of the things that stood out to me is just the people of that country. Actually, something that I've felt here in Philadelphia coming as well. We're so open to reporters. We're so welcoming to expats, to basically strangers coming in and saying, hey, I would love to help tell this story. And that was so meaningful to me. And I don't think that I would be in this role today if not for the kindness of Colombians, of the people of Medellin at that time. That really showed me what, the power of journalism could be.
All right, so you finish that job in Medellin, and what happens next? You come back to the States and land a job in journalism here?
Yeah, so I finished my job in Colombia, and I loved the job so much. I covered a lot of their politics. I covered the presidential elections in 2014, getting in touch with interviewing a number of the candidates for that particular race. And I said to myself, I want to be doing that back in the States. I want to be doing politics and political coverage back in the United States. So I ended up somehow getting a job at NBC in their Page program, which got me into the building in 30 Rock. I worked there in New York, loved it, worked for the NBC election unit, worked for nightly news. And then it all translated into a job heading into 2016, becoming what's called a campaign embed reporter for NBC News, which basically is a job where they take young, aspiring journalists and young journalists in their field, hand you a camera and say, go, good luck, welcome to the craziest story you may ever cover in your life. So for almost 2 years, I lived out of a suitcase, hotel, covering the 2016 election for NBC News. That meant covering a lot of Bernie Sanders, a lot of Hillary Clinton surrogates. I lived in Des Moines for 6 months out of the Iowa caucuses. An incredible experience. That was kind of the next chapter of my career, if you will.
And what was one of the best experiences that you remember from that particular time in your life?
One of the things I say about journalism, which is almost cliche at this point, is that journalism is a privilege because it gives you a front row seat to history. But I say it because it's true, right? It's a cliche because it's true. And that experience on the campaign trail made you appreciate that. There are a million stories, a million examples, but one that stands out, I should say, is I was there at the Javits Center in New York City, in Manhattan, on election night in 2016 with the Clinton campaign as, it became clear that Trump would become President Trump. And that was just such a moment, again, it was a moment in history to be there in that room, the moment that everyone realized what happened. And again, just to, not to relitigate 2016, but to remember, nobody expected that.
Yeah.
Nobody expected that result. So to see something that is so surprising to a nation and a world up close, again, it's a privilege.
Yeah, and I think if you ask any reporter where they were when it was announced that Trump was the winner, we all remember it.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So Danny, after that you moved to San Diego, right? To start your job as a political
reporter. After I moved to California, I was in Bakersfield, California for a little over a year, then moved to San Diego with NBC as well. I had my own political show. That's where we met. Had a wonderful time covering news in San Diego. But I am originally from New York. I'm from the East Coast. So that's why I ended up at NBC Philadelphia. I've been here since January. It's been kind of a wild ride.
Extremely wild, yes. Okay, so, and journalism obviously has its extremely rewarding moments. I agree with you. We do have a front line to history, and it's amazing because we get to see firsthand when things happen, when things break, and then, to go out and report it to the world is a privilege. But there's also challenges within the news industry. So what do you think has been one of the hardest struggles you've faced so far throughout your career?
It's that's the thing they don't tell you, right? They tell you the front row seat to history. That's going to be part of it. I have a bunch of press badges from all over the country and the world.
Oh, I collect them too.
yeah, you get it.
I love it.
Exactly. Some from the Vatican, from Puerto Rico, from all over the country and the world, but they don't tell you how much of a toll it takes on you as a person. And this is something that you discussed. This is something that has been a conversation, and why this enterprise of yours is so important is because everything is harder. Your own relationships with your family, trying to make time for your own relationships as a person. Things always seem to get put on hold in journalism for the sake of the job. Every 2 years, not having an apartment to call my own really until I was 25, 26 years old. All of those things are real, and challenging. And none of that is to say how challenging the job itself can be when you're in disaster zones, when you're knocking on the door of someone who has just lost their loved one, when the news impacts you and your family personally. So there have been a number of challenges, and there will be a number of challenges in the years to come, I know. But so far, the journey has been worth it.
And with those challenges, have you gotten to a breaking point where you feel like it took a toll on your mental, emotional, or physical health? And can you, guide me to a specific example, if so?
Yeah, sure. I mean, God, certainly. I mean, I'll talk actually about physical health first, because I think both tie into each other. I mean, I remember during the campaign trail, I was, like I said, I was living out of hotels. I was traveling all over the country. It was this fantastic, wonderful experience that took me all over the world. And yet I gained about 45 pounds during it. And that's a lot. And, it's challenging because, you're in an industry that is so age-centric, and you're going on TV and you can see it, you can feel your clothes expand, and we all want to be healthy and run and cook and sleep, but a lot of times journalism does not allow you to run and cook and sleep in a healthy way, and that's something that took a lot of effort to reverse and to understand why it was happening. And that's part of it, is that you become addicted to news, is how I have felt in my life. And I'm sure that you've had people discuss this before. I love my job, but that means that a lot of times your job is not divorced from your life or your personal identity. Mm-hmm. So it can be unhealthy to not be sleeping or sleep so lightly because you're always checking, well, what's happening in the stock market? What did the president tweet? Should I be trying to confirm something now because I'm getting emailed from my bosses, even though it's 1 o'clock in the morning? That is at times my reality. And I think that's one of those things that needs to be broken in terms of helping journalists maintain their mental health. One other thing I'll say just quickly is that you asked for a specific example of mental health as well. Mm-hmm. I remember very clearly the Las Vegas shooting at the Mandalay Bay. And I was in Bakersfield, California at the time. I was working there as a reporter. And there were so many people from our market that were at that concert that were traumatized, frightened, killed. The young person who was killed in the Vegas massacre was from our market. And I remember getting that call at 11 o'clock at night on that Sunday, right when Bradford happened, saying, you got to go. You got to get in your car and go. And I remember driving that long drive to Vegas with my photographer in the middle of the night, trying to get there by morning, and having tears run down my face and my photographer's face, just trying to comprehend what we were driving into. And what can you say? It's brutal and it's hard. But I'm glad that I had a photographer with me to share in that experience, because a lot of times you're by yourself, and that's even harder.
Yeah, a lot of times you're sent as a multimedia journalist, and I mean, if coping with the heaviness of those types of situations is already hard enough, trying to figure out by yourself how to cover the story, how to find an interview, how to get video, and how to take care of yourself with no one to talk to, with nobody that's going through the situation with you at the same time, that helps you feel understood, is extremely difficult.
So in Philadelphia, one of the challenges that this city is having at this particular moment is is homicides and death. We are having likely what will be the deadliest year in the city's recorded history when it comes to homicides and murders. So what that means for us as reporters is very, very often we are talking about homicide, death, shootings, as the mayor said just this week, preventable violence. So I was doing a story with one of my photographers the other day, and it was about kill shelters for animals, right? And we were finishing up the story. It was a good story. It was, going to help animals be saved from getting killed, and it was about dogs and cats, and the shelters were overflowing. The shelters were overflowing with animals, and there was an urgent call because they would have to start euthanizing animals if nothing happened. We put the story together. We're ready to hit send, and we got the call that a young girl, was both shot and also hit by a car in a few moments. And we had to go leave our animals euthanizing stories to cover this awful story of this girl who was shot and hit by a car. And it was that moment where I said, "I'm sorry," to the animal shelter, "we have to change our story." And she said, "Why?" And we said, "Because of this." And she said, "I understand." And we got in the car, and I had to say to my photographer, "Can we hold on for just a second? Because I am still processing I said, "Jason, I'm still processing the potential of death of all of these animals in our community caused by the pandemic being so stressful on people's lives. I need to just address that before I can step into this other awful story of this girl, this child who was hit by a car and shot." And I found that helpful to just pause, acknowledge what we had just been at, and then prepare for what we were going to.
And what is, how do you use that moment of pause, or what is something specifically that helps you address certain stories, understand your emotions, and be able to move forward in a healthier way to a different story?
For me, you have to talk about it. You have to talk about it. And like I said, Philadelphia has been going through an epidemic of gun violence. And there are a lot of photographers, a lot of reporters who every night go to these shooting scenes, who every night walks up to an area where there is a body covered by a tarp. Mm-hmm. And that is really hard for them, if they're by themselves, to process that every single night and then go home to your wife, to your husband, to your loved ones, and not bring that home. It's hard. It's hard if you're doing it every single night. So for me, talking about it and saying something has been a lifeline. And, we don't always have the answers. If my photographer says something to me, if I said to my photographer, we don't always know what to say, but just to be in the moment with another person and process what we are seeing and what we just saw is healing.
Danny, and you work for NBC Universal, which is a Fortune 500 company, and they honestly, I can truly say, do a great job at trying to be supportive, trying to be understanding, trying to be a better company. Of course, there's things that we can always improve, but I have to say that the companies that I have worked for, by far, NBC has been the best one. Have you felt supported in times of, where you feel like you need help or you need guidance or you need time to process certain stories or certain situations?
Yeah, I do think that my companies that I've worked for have supported me in those situations. But to be perfectly honest, Emiliana, I think that, and I think this is indicative of one of the larger problems about this discussion about mental health and journalism is that I don't think I have reached out nearly enough for help as much as I should in this industry, in my job. I think that a lot of times journalists, you know this very well, I think a lot of times journalists want to view themselves as cowboys, as not vulnerable to what they're covering day in and day out. And that's just not true. And the more that we acknowledge it, the more that I try to acknowledge that and be conscious that, hey, you know what? It's okay to ask for help. I think the better that I will be, not only at my job, but also just as a person. I think the better that a lot of journalists across this country will be as well. Just to be able to ask, or not, rather, just to be able to say, hey, this was awful. I need to talk to someone about it.
Yeah. Yeah, we're not indestructible. And let me ask you a very personal question. Because most of the reporters that I've spoken to, the females all say, yeah, 100% therapy, like 100%. Have you gone to therapy, or do you feel like part of not reaching out for help enough also has to do with the fact that you are a male and you were maybe raised to not be vulnerable?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, listen, I don't think necessarily that I was personally in my home raised to not be vulnerable, but I think that in journalism, especially if you're a guy, there's a culture of you go out there. You go out there, you should be fearless, you should be knocking on doors, you should be walking through the floodwater, you should be willing to take risks for the sake of the story, for the sake of the viewer. And often at your own potential risk, without a doubt. And the other thing too is, we're journalists. We regardless of male or female, I think we want to tell the story. I always say this: I want to be on TV. I want to bring you this news. But there have been moments, certainly in this job, where I'm very thankful when my photographer or producer says, Danny, you don't need to do this. You don't need to. This is not worth risking your life today. Mm-hmm. I want to tell a lot of stories over a lot of years. There's a downed wire. This is too dangerous. Let's move. Let's get out of here. You don't need to be a hero. And that's important. So to answer your question, the larger question, no, I have not sought out therapy as a result of this industry or my job yet. And one of the things, frankly, I'm excited to do is to seek out therapy as a result of this job and also in my personal life, just because I think that thankfully we're in a time where it is not viewed as weak. Mm-hmm. There's something wrong necessarily with you to go to therapy. It's just should you go and get your physical at the doctor, and you should check on your mental health as well.
For sure, I totally agree. Thank you for being so open about that, Danny. Is there one thing that you would like journalists who are on the field right now, maybe struggling with mental health, physical or emotional, um, that you would recommend, or any advice that you want to give colleagues aside from, seeking therapy or talking about their stories?
Yeah, two different things. There are a few different things. The first is that the way that I think about journalism, especially if you're in a local TV market, especially if you're a print reporter, really if you're anyone kind of doing this day in and day out, frankly, I think of it like baseball, where you always have another shot coming up the next day. Just because today goes wrong, because today goes bad, just because today was hard, doesn't mean that tomorrow doesn't mean that tomorrow will be. And it also, you will have a tomorrow. Tomorrow will come, you will have more chances to either get the story right, to reframe yourself, to have maybe a more or a less difficult day. And the same thing about baseball, right? In baseball, you have, over 100 games in a year. You get a lot of chances. Today is not permanent. Tomorrow will come. There will be another newscast. There will be another day. So you can leave that day behind if you can. But I think that a lot of times just having the permission or knowing you're right, I can put this day behind me and still wake up tomorrow and still do a good job and still approach a day with new health and new energy. You can, and you're allowed to. You don't have to take home every single story and live with that. So that's the first thing I would say, is just to remember that it's not, a lot of these things do not have to be permanent. A lot of things is, of course, not your choice if they're permanent, but it doesn't have to be permanent every single day, and you get more reps. Mm-hmm. The other thing too is that, like I said before, I mean, the only way that I have been able to survive in this industry, in terms of my physical health, in terms of my mental health, is to find and seek out the other people in this industry who are dealing with the same things you are. And there are a lot of us. And most of us are willing to have that conversation. But I have been, and I know too many reporters who often want to silo themselves off so much from the day-to-day in your job that you don't realize how much mental health help you may need until finally one coworker asks the questions, "How are you doing?" We had a session on mental health the other day in our station at NBC Philadelphia, and it was just very revealing because you can tell there are some reporters, there are some producers, there are some folks who are traumatized, take it home, and never say anything to anyone about it, and try to brush it off, try to say, it's okay. Then you don't realize how deep that pain is and how many layers of trauma there may be until you, for the first time, perhaps talk about it with another reporter, another person going through that.
Yeah.
So talk about it. That would be my biggest advice, because it won't get better if you don't talk about it. And it will only build if you don't talk about it.
I agree. So thank you for talking about it. Danny, anything you would like the world to know about journalists?
Yeah, I mean, the biggest thing I would like the world to know about journalists is that, we are human, right? We are, not only we're human, but one of the things I really love about local journalism is we live here too, right? We live in this community. We want our communities to succeed. We want our communities to be better. We want our communities to be places where our families and your families can grow up and thrive. And I just hope people know that, because a lot of times people think we're out to get them. We're frustrated. We're trying to dig into things. And that's true. We want to uncover things, but we want to do it with your interests in mind. And we live here too. We don't want to be villains in our own communities. We want to help. And it's not always perfect. It's, the rough draft of history, right? But we're working every day to make sure it gets better. I can say that.
I love that. And as we work every day to make sure that it gets better, what is one thing that you'd like to see improved in the news industry to make it better?
That's a good question.
There's plenty of things, I know, but one thing.
Yeah, just if I could choose.
Just one.
At least in relation to our conversation, right? Because there's a lot of things I would love to change in the news industry, but at least mental health in relation to healing and protecting ourselves in this kind of crazy environment that we often are thrown into. I would want the notion that we, excuse me, the thing that I think I would want to change in this industry would be the mindset that we, as journalists, as producers, as managers even, always have to be plugged in to what is happening every single day. I am guilty of it. I, on my days off, will go and watch the 11 o'clock news and watch the 4 o'clock news and text someone saying, hey, I think that may have been the wrong video, or what do you think about this? Or actually, I have a source who can talk to you about this. And your life does not have to be a news cycle. Your life does not have to be dictated by a news cycle. And I wish that were explained more to young journalists so that the habits don't form when you're in your first market and your first job and you think, my whole life has to be this. And I'm working on that.
I completely agree. And yes, I remember you texting me several times, sending me sources and helping me with stories. And I appreciate it highly. But we need to unplug and disconnect for our own mental health and well-being.
Yeah, seriously. And, and one of the things for me, so it's funny, to bring it full circle, if you will.
Yeah.
So I mentioned the weight gain right after 2016, and that was like my family and everyone were like, "What is wrong? I mean, what is wrong?" Seriously, I said, I was like, "I promise nothing is wrong." I'm
going through something.
No, I'm going through something, but also this is a particularly unhealthy environment.
Yeah,
got it. I will handle this. I know this is an anomaly, and thus birthed out of that, one of my great passions, hobbies, something I'd never done before in my life, and that was running. When I got to California after the campaign trail and I was, very overweight, I said, I'm going to fix it and let's try this. I've never done this before. It seems to be very beneficial. It seems to be very helpful for a lot of other people. And it was great. I would say it was a lifesaver. What I love about running is that you can't look at a screen while you're running. You can't be tethered to a television when you're running. You can't really read an article when you're running. You still listen to podcasts, but it's so important to my mental health to get outside, to not be looking at screens, to not be looking at Twitter, and to enjoy the environment around me. That was lifesaver.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, exercise is key to taking care of yourself because of all the benefits that come with it. So, yeah. Speaking about it, exercise, unplug. Anything else?
No, just, and I guess the last thing is just, one photographer, this is one thing I wanted to mention, is that one photographer once told me is, because we run toward the fire. We run toward the crime scene like first responders do, 100%. But at the end of the day, we are lucky in that we don't have to save a life at the end of the night. If we miss slot, if we miss deadline, it's bad, don't do it, but it's okay. You and yourself, those nights will suck, but it's just TV. It's just news.
Yeah.
And you'll get it the next day.
Yeah. And it's okay to miss a deadline. Yes, we feel terrible if we miss a deadline, but it's not the end of the world, for sure. And sometimes it happens. I mean, we have to meet a deadline every single day. It's okay if every once in a while.
It's happened to all of us.
Yeah.
It's happened to all of us.
Exactly. Awesome. Danny, if you don't have anything else to add, I think I'll leave it on that note. Awesome. Thank you so much for opening up with me and feel better. I know you were a little bit sick, so thank you for doing this while you were sick. You're amazing. And say hi to Lori.
Will do. Thank you.
Journalists, this one's for you, to help you heal, to help you understand your worth, and to help you know you're not alone. So share the love and subscribe to Spotify and YouTube and follow us on Instagram. The Awakened Journalist is proud to present Media Healers by Emiliana Molina Fajardo.